All right, folks, my season has finally kicked off, and it feels great to be back in the saddle. That's both speaking figuratively and literally. If you're tired, of course, of lugging around heavy, bulky tree stands and would like to hunt lighter and more mobile, or maybe you just want to feel like a tree ninja, then you need to check out the Tethered Mantis saddle and the Predator platform. Head to tetherednation.com. That's TETHRDNATION.com for all your saddle hunting info and release your inner tree ninja. First thing I do in the morning before a hunt is, of course, I have to have my morning coffee, and I'm sure most of you out there probably feel the same. Make sure you're filling your mug with Skull Brew coffee, as it is the only coffee company that is both 2% for conservation certified and, of course, donates 10% of their profits to conservation organizations who are helping us to secure the future of our wild places. So head to skullbrewcoffee.com and choose between 3 kilo roasts of coffee and know that you are supporting conservation with every sip. All right, what is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're all doing well out there. I'm pretty stoked because my hunting season finally came in. Officially kicked off here this past Saturday. Was in a tree with my buddy Wilson. I actually didn't go out and hunt. Well, I shouldn't say I didn't go out and hunt, but I wasn't carrying a bow. The property where I have a couple deer that I'm interested in, or at least, a terrain feature where some decent deer are showing up, where mature deer are hanging out, or at least using. I needed a different wind. And I'm trying to hold true, at least here at the beginning part of the season, where I'm not making some fatal mistakes I think that I've made in years past. So I know you've heard me talk about having burner properties. I have a couple of those. But instead of going and hunting those, I decided, to go film my buddy Wilson. He had a deer that he had eyes on, and had a pretty good morning pattern that he'd been working on with this deer. Had been watching him, glassing him, had some trail camera inventory from him. Actually glassed him a couple times, watching him kind of come out of the food, heading to back to bed. Got to say, the setup's pretty dynamite. We actually saw a buck, which was, I think we had him at 8 yards or something like that, and then a doe. And he put eyes on his shooter, or his target deer. I forget, I think it was somewhere between 50 and 70 yards out. He had him in the binos, and he was making his way toward us. And then for whatever reason, he got in behind we were set up in a cedar thicket. And something happened between the time we were able to see him or glass him, and to when we thought he should be kind of passing by. Something happened in between there, and he ended up changing course, and he never did come by. We had a good wind for the setup. I'm trying to remember back, and I feel like I was dropping milkweed, checking the wind, and I feel like I did it right after he was, he gave me the signal like, hey, I see him. He's out here, and he's working his way toward us. And based on the timestamps that he had for, when he was seeing him, when he was glassing, the time of the morning, and then kind of marrying that with what he had seen on some of the trail camera pictures for a timestamp, where he was at and where we were set up, it should have been maybe another, 20 minutes or so until he would kind of make his way toward us. And which would have put him right, on track with what, has held true for Wilson from what he's been seeing. And about that time, I feel like the wind switched. I'm trying to remember if I dropped milkweed right at that time, but the wind switched the complete opposite right about that time. And I don't know that my fear was that he wasn't down, I guess, below us far enough, and was kind of crossing where the wind had switched on us potentially. That's the only thing I can think of, because he was on track to kind of make the move and set up where we thought he was going to set up. Unless he caught a little bit of our wind, and it literally switched from 3 minutes. And then the wind switched back and behaved the rest of the morning as we thought it would. But that might have been just enough to save that deer from an arrow. So that was my opening day hunt. And then of course I had some business duties to tend to with the coffee company that afternoon. So I didn't get out for an evening hunt, but of course it heated up here as well. So I wasn't necessarily looking to go fill a doe tag either in the heat. Just going to be completely honest, I didn't want to have to scramble and try to get that thing taken care of based on the temperatures that we were going to have. And it's kind of a bummer, man. The last week leading up to the opener, we were getting some really nice cool temperatures, where we were getting, the highs, and we're 71, 72, which were awesome. And then of course, the hunting season comes in, and we have 85-degree days, and today I think it's the high is 88. And I think we're actually even going to tickle 90 here at the beginning part of the week. So I'm hoping that we get some cool temperatures here soon to kind of make it feel like hunting season. I'm not saying that you can't kill deer in warm weather, because you certainly can. You can look on Instagram or Facebook, and there's people killing big deer or good deer all over the place in warm temperatures. But for me, I just didn't have the right wind, and it looks like I'm I think Tuesday morning and Friday morning, it looks like I'm going to have the wind that I need to hunt this one particular setup for this one particular buck. So I'm hoping that that holds true because I do have this particular area. I am getting good activity in morning in shooting light. So I'm going to kind of use what John and I have talked about in the past, where I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive, and I'm going to hunt morning setups whenever I have a deer that's killable in the morning, which I do at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and make a plunge into it and see if I can't make it happen. But other than that, it's full go now with deer season, which I'm pretty excited about. Licking my chops, of course, to get ready to go to Iowa here. It's hard to believe it's just a little bit more than a month out, and I'll be on the road to Iowa. But I'm going to go ahead and get cracking. I'm not going to say belabor this up front because someone called me out on Instagram as that being my catchphrase. So I'm going to try to refrain from saying that. But today we have a super cool show. I have Don Higgins on for part 2 of his DIY report miniseries. And if you recall, if you didn't listen to the first one, go back and listen to that one. I think it was episode number 136. And what we're doing is just kind of picking Don's brain and getting an understanding of how he likes to approach the season during different times of the year and what his process is, what he's looking for, what he's focusing on. And so the first one, if I'm not mistaken, I think we really kind of focused on, I'm just looking to make sure I'm correct here. We focused on late season, how he's kind of approaching like the winter months and stuff like that. Season has just ended. What are you doing in the timber or otherwise to prepare yourself for a successful upcoming season? And so this part 2, what we're going to talk about today, is what he does and prioritizes during the spring and summer. Now, I know a little bit of this might be a late information, so you'll want to put this in the mental Rolodex for next year. And then for those of you that maybe, the season doesn't start until the beginning of October, I think the statewide opener in PA, I want to say, is like October 5th-ish. Some of this stuff may still apply to you, I think, but what you'll hear from Don is that, a lot of what he's doing this time of year is he's trying not to be in the woods a whole lot this time of year, of course. I think that's where the smart money's at. But he does have some things that he likes to do in the spring, and we'll talk about those. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started and jump right in with Don Higgins. As always, thank you all for listening, and good luck in the timber. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, and we're still here with none other than Mr. Don Higgins doing this DIY report. How are you doing, sir?
Great. How are you?
Good. So the first session we did, we were talking a little bit about the postseason right after following the hunting season. And this next session, we want to talk a little bit about spring and getting into early summer, because that, for a lot of guys, and I think we touched on it in the last segment too, a lot of guys, that's when they really kind of ratchet up, their whitetail work, if you will. And I know just from the last segment that we did, it's, you get a lot of stuff done. You'd like to have your stands in the timber way early, trying to make as little intrusion as possible as spring green up kind of happens and so forth. But, at this point in the year, I know, as I'd mentioned, folks are doing a lot of work to putting out mineral, they're prepping trees, they're trying to get their food plots in and so forth. But at this point, you've already kind of targeted a deer and are kind of ready to roll, right? At this point, you kind of know who is around from last year, and you have your, the Don Higgins hit list, if you will, to a degree, right?
Yeah, pretty much. By the time late spring rolls around, I've collected those trail cameras about the time bucks shed their antlers, and I know which bucks are still alive and which bucks I can be looking for in velvet that summer.
Mm-hmm. So from a strategy perspective, and particularly with habitat, I think I read recently you were writing something about, I think it's, now correct me if I'm wrong, I might have the name of it wrong, but you were talking about a killing path versus mowing paths in tall grass for mature bucks. So, can you kind of explain what that is and where you kind of came up with this approach?
Yeah, actually, it's probably been close to 25, maybe even 30 years ago, but at least 20, 25 years ago. I was in a stand in November. There was a hot doe come through the woods, and she's got a buck that I wanted to shoot behind her. And that buck and that doe was around my stand for more than a half hour, and I could never get a shot at that buck because every time he stopped, he was in thick brush. And there was plenty of open areas. I could have shot that doe 20 times. But that buck, whenever he wanted that brush right up against his side, he didn't want to stop in the open, and he wouldn't stop in the open. He just insisted on being in the most cover that he possibly could, while still staying close to that doe. And I took note of that, and in the following years, I noted more than once the mature bucks just will not follow mowed paths like other deer do. They want that cover, thick cover, right up brushing their sides. And, on my farm, I've got a lot of the warm season native grasses, tall switchgrass fields and such that years ago I would mow paths through them. And, lo and behold, the does and younger bucks, they would follow those paths just like a highway through those fields. But the mature bucks never did. I would see the mature bucks from a stand crossing those fields or working through those fields or whatever, but they never used them mowed paths. They wanted to have that switchgrass right up against their sides. And, I got to thinking, and I, in fact, I haven't mowed paths in the grass fields or anywhere on my property for a few years now because of that. But I got to thinking, so if they're not going to follow those mowed paths, is there anything I can do to help direct those mature bucks past my stand? Because the mowed paths certainly weren't working, and the deer wanted to still have that cover on their side. So I got to thinking, well, how about if I just spray, a herbicide like Roundup or whatever, and kill the vegetation in a real narrow path, say maybe a foot, 18 inches wide, where there's a buck can walk down it, and he's still got, the grass or the brush or whatever rubbing against his side. And so I've been doing that for a few years, and it works like a charm. And, the thing about it is, I made a post about that you're referring to on Facebook, and even showed some pictures and things, and got all kinds of responses. And some guys were saying that it was garbage because they've seen mature bucks follow mowed paths. Well, I'm not saying that never will it happen.
Right.
There's going to be exceptions to every rule, but the bucks that do follow mowed paths, well, I guess the guys that are mowing paths, they're going to kill them.
Right.
But what about the 80 or 90% of mature bucks that refuse to follow that mowed path? Well, those guys are going to totally miss it.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is I want to maximize my chances at every single mature buck I'm hunting.
Right.
Spraying those paths has proven to be a real game changer because you can direct those deer right past your tree stand.
Yeah, and
through some really thick cover.
Yeah, and deer. I saw that post and I just thought it was I thought it was interesting. All the differing of opinions, I guess, if you will. But it just seems it makes sense because the mowing paths things, sure, they may follow them. That I kind of subscribe to the same thing that you're kind of talking about here, right? Where it's sure, a blind squirrel will find a nut every once in a while, right? So you'll have these exceptions where a deer will follow that mowed path or a mature buck will follow that mowed path. But in the same breath, deer are always looking for cover. So that mature buck that followed that mowed path would also be inclined to take the path of least resistance if he had more cover still, right? So it's
exactly,
yeah. So it's like you're just kind of sweetening the deal for him versus giving him a highway to walk down. You're giving him best of both worlds in that sense, right? You're giving him a path of least resistance to use, while you're allowing him to remain covered up and feel good about where he's walking. Exactly. Yeah. So makes sense to me. So I'm hooked on it. I just need a property to spray me some paths. If I can work on that, then we'll be in good shape. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your stand locations. I know that you like to hang, early in the year, right? I know you like to try to stay out of the places you're going to be hunting and get things set up as early, 4 or 5 months in advance. But for those folks who are out there that might still be, or that will be hanging stands in the spring or early summer, if you could just kind of talk me through how you pick a stand location and what kind of factors and what things you're thinking about when you're finding the location where you're going to hang your set. Just kind of walk me through what your thought process is.
Well, first of all, access is everything. If you can't access a spot, it doesn't matter how good it is. If you can't access it without disturbing deer, it's worthless.
Right.
So access is everything. And basically I'm looking for areas where the natural terrain funnels deer through an area. Ravines, creeks or rivers making a big sweeping bend. A lot of times there will be a bluff. And at the top of that bluff, the deer are pinched down. At the top of a ravine, close to a field edge, a lot of times the deer are pinched down. So I'm looking at areas where the deer traffic is naturally pinched down. And then I'm considering where the deer going, where they bedding, where they feeding, what wind directions can be hunted from that stand. Is it better morning or evening? It's just a lot of different factors that I'm considering.
Right.
But, more than anything, I'm looking at terrain.
Right. Yeah. I mean, will you hang multiple sets, or will you have multiple trees set up for multiple winds within one particular location? If a situation allows for it or calls for it?
Very rarely, because usually the access is going to be an issue from one of the two. For example, if you wanted to set up on both sides of a pinch point, usually access is only going to be good, or it's going to be better on one side than it is the other.
Right.
And that'll be the side that I usually take.
Right.
But, picking stand sites, there's no substitute for experience, because it's just like when you see the right spot, it's like I said in the last podcast, a light bulb goes off. And some of my consulting clients, will send me pictures of bucks they've shot. They'll say, I shot this buck in that very tree where you hung the ribbon and told me to put my stand, and I still don't know why you told me to put a stand there. And it's like you just can't substitute experience with anything else. And I can't even find the words to describe it. When you see it, you know it.
Right. It's so funny that you say that, because it's, whether I'm talking to you or, and I think well, I'm sure you know of him, but Dan Enfalt, I'm not sure how much you know Dan, or if you've ever spoke with him much at length. But he's kind of the same way, where it's like, he can, he just gets this sixth sense almost, where it's like, this is where a big buck lives. It's to the point, I've told this story before, where I was hunting a swamp, and I had just started hunting swamps last year. And I had an encounter with one of the better deer on that piece. And I had two really good deer in there, especially for Pennsylvania, and I was getting the slip. And I finally just was, in the tree the one day, and I text Dan while I was sitting there. I was like, hey, this is what's going on. I mean, I didn't have to show him a map or anything. I just told him what I was seeing. And he was like, check the first transition in. He was like, I bet you're all your signs there. And sure enough, I checked the first transition in, and that's where like all the action was. So, so it's one of those things where it's just that experience, right? Like just like you're saying, like you've seen it, lived it so many times, where it's just innate. It just happens,
Yeah, I've known the name Dan Enfalt for a number of years. I've never really corresponded with him, but we've shared a few messages back and forth on Facebook. And it's just been in the last year or so that I've really paid attention to his writings. And every time I read something he writes, it's like, man, I could have wrote that. I agree with every single word that guy just wrote.
Right.
It's really, it's kind of funny that, once you reach a certain level, you can tell the real deal from the pretenders.
Yep.
And Dan is the real deal. I've never met the man in my life, but I guarantee he's the real deal. I can just tell it by the way he talks.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's, I don't know. I'll say this. Like, I feel, having this podcast has afforded me a lot of, opportunities to talk with some folks who I otherwise probably would not in a million years get a chance to talk with, like yourself. You know what I mean? And, feel grateful that I get a chance to, pick someone's brain who's been doing it as long as you or as long as Dan. I don't ever claim to be anything special. My goal is just to try to learn every year as much as I can. And then when guys who are as experienced as you guys are, if you're willing to keep me with keep company with me and share it with me, then I'm all ears and willing to listen. But yeah, I mean, like yourself, like you guys are two of the realest deals that I've had the opportunity to kind of talk to in the whitetail world. And that's just not me saying that. I mean, there's a lot of, you don't need my endorsement. There's a lot of folks I think probably feel the same way. But I'm curious, I was watching some YouTube videos. Just I've been consuming a little bit of hunting information from some fellas I like to follow. Watching some of their hunts from previous years and stuff like that. And I'm always curious, when guys hang sets or when they're getting into their tree, how much they prioritize cover and how much they trim. Are you a guy that likes to trim a decent amount of lanes and doesn't want to let shot opportunities go by, or do you kind of, I guess, prioritize cover when you're in the tree versus wide open shooting lanes? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think it's a balance. You've got to be hidden in that tree. If you can't just be like stuck on the side of a telephone pole.
Right.
Yeah, you need some cover. But at the same time, you want to be able, when a deer comes along, you want to be able to get a shot at him. And that's one reason I get my stands ready in the late winter. The leaves are off the trees. You're seeing everything as it'll be during hunting season.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember years ago when I would hang stands in the summer right before season, you'd get in there and you'd trim a bunch of lanes and things. Then when the leaves fell off, I mean, you felt naked. You was on the side of that tree. You weren't hid at all.
Right.
So there's a balance. You got to be hid. But at the same time, when a buck comes in, you want to make sure that you've got ample opportunity to shoot him.
Right. And how many sets do you think you hang in a year? I mean, are you hanging, is it, I know you hunt multiple properties and so forth. I mean, you hang in 15, 20? It's, what's the number?
I mean, like right now, if season opened tomorrow, I could choose from probably about 40 different stands.
Yeah, that's a lot of hanging, a lot of trimming work there, right?
Yeah, and a lot of them are like, I've got ladder stands that have been there for years,
mm-hmm.
and it just depends on the tree. And
mm-hmm.
I don't go to every single stand every single off season.
Right.
Basically, I'm looking at my trail camera pictures. If I think there's a buck on this property that could be a shooter next year, if he just puts on 20 inches or whatever. So those are the properties I'm paying attention to. I'm looking at the bucks I've already located and that are potential shooters and where they live, and that's the stands I'm focused on.
Right. So that's a good segue into trail cameras, right? Because I had read something recently that you had written, and you were talking about what time of year you like to put your cams out, and why that time of year is when you prefer to do it. Can you kind of talk a little bit about when you like to hang your cameras and why that specifically, that timing is when you like to do it?
Yeah, I try to get mine out about the 1st of July, and the reason I don't put them out before that is the bucks the racks aren't developed enough to be able to tell individual bucks, and or how big a buck is really going to be, how many points he's going to have, and by the 1st of July, early July, you got a pretty good idea how a buck's going to look, and that's why I wait. And the other thing is, it's pretty common knowledge that the first time you hunt a stand is your best chance to kill a buck from that stand.
Right.
And it's the same way with a trail camera. I can't tell you how many cameras I've hung over the years and got a mature buck's picture, but I only got his picture there one time. And after that, he knew the camera was there and he wasn't coming back through. So I don't want to go and get his picture, the 1st of June when he's barely got a rack, and educate him, and then he doesn't come back, and I don't have any idea how he finished out. I want to wait till there's enough antler there. I know what he's going to be.
Right. Now, I mean, are at this point of the year, I guess, let's talk maybe like later summer, are you a mock scrape guy, or you don't fool with them much?
I use rope scrapes, where you hang the rope from a branch, and I put those out, early in the winter, right after season, let them weather all summer. A lot of times when I'm putting my trail cameras out in the summer, I'll take a small spray bottle of Roundup herbicide, and if I'm putting cameras in the area of those ropes, I'll spray a 3 or 4 foot circle underneath those ropes to kill the vegetation. And then about the 1st of September and through the 1st of October, I'll transition my trail cameras from summer feeding areas to fall rutting areas, and I'll put them on those rope scrapes and put some scent on the rope, and a good way to inventory the bucks that are on the property.
Right. And what scent are you using? I know you've had deer in the past. Are you using your own Don Higgins formula?
No, I haven't had captive deer for a couple of years now. I'm using Smokies. It's made
okay.
by Smokey McNicholas, trapper in West Virginia.
West Virginia. Yeah, yeah. I've used his stuff in the past.
Yep.
It was the one time I actually had I got a little pre-orbital lure from him a couple years ago whenever you were still able to use it in, well, the part of PA that our family farms are in. And I actually had some success with it. So it was pretty cool. That's one of the things I'm kind of getting ready to try this year is, I've not had a ton of success with mock scrapes. I'm curious to get your opinion on this. Do you think that mock scrapes sometimes work a little, better just in general in areas where they're getting a little less pressure and less guys are using lures and scent in the timber? Because I've tried mock scrapes in the past, and maybe I'm just not doing them right, but I don't seem to get nearly the activity that my friends out in the Midwest get. And I kind of started thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder if it's because every Joe Schmo in the woods, at that time of year is out in the woods stinking it up, putting out cameras and, hanging stands, late in the summer and putting out their mock scrapes and stuff like that and starting to educate the deer. And then they kind of learn that scent is not only the scent of a human, but then the scent of a deer is associated with it, or preorbital lure or urine or whatever you're using. And then they kind of know that, like, hey, this might be a false positive here. What do you think?
Well, with mock scrapes, location is everything. So if you've got them in a good location where the deer should be hitting them, the reason I use Smokies, well, besides the fact that it works, and I think one of the reasons it works so well is it's not everybody in the woods is carrying it. You got to order it from him. You can't go down to Walmart and buy Smokies. So,
right.
I don't want that buck to smell something that he smelled last week with some guy that was sitting there smoking cigarettes as he made his mock scrape. I want it to be a totally different odor.
Right.
And odds are nobody in the areas I'm hunting are using Smokies. So,
right. Yeah.
I think that's one reason it works so well.
Right. Are you using preorbital or is it urine for your scrapes?
I've used every scent that Smokey makes, and I don't know how many he's got, probably half a dozen.
Mm-hmm.
And every single one of them has worked fine. In fact, they work great. So
nice.
I don't think that which one is real critical.
Okay.
I think the big thing is, like I said, nobody else in the area is using it.
Right. Yeah, it sometimes pays to be the odd man out, right? Especially with those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is the last question for this particular segment. But as it stands right now, we're here in August. What does your target list look like for this year, and what's your criteria this year to make the Higgins hit list?
Well, boy, that's a good question because I've got trail cameras out I haven't even checked yet. I've been so busy on the road.
Right.
I think in the last month I've done seminars in Kansas, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, and I just came back from two different. I've been in Texas twice in the last 2 weeks.
Nice.
I still got to go to Pennsylvania, Indiana this coming weekend. So I've got cameras I haven't even checked yet.
Nice.
I can tell you so far, I've been pretty disappointed. I was wondering, when we have a good growing season for our crops, it's also good for antler growth. You get those steady rains through the summer.
Yep. And
it seems like the bucks are a little better that year. And I've been wondering, with all the rain we had last spring, how it was going to affect antler growth, because I know the crops in my part of the Midwest are at least 30 days behind where they normally are this time of year.
Okay.
And from what I've seen with my cameras, there's been a lot of bucks that I was hoping would put on, more points and more inches for sure. And a lot of them have fewer points than they had last year.
Wow.
They still have the same frames. If they had a big frame before, they still have a big frame, but maybe with less points and less total inches. So,
right.
A year ago, I put a blog post out where I predicted there'd be some giants killed just because of what I was seeing. We had a great growing season a year ago. Almost every acre of corn in my part of Illinois made over 200 bushels an acre. And a lot of soybeans were over 80 and even some over 90 bushels an acre.
Wow.
Just the best growing season I ever remember. And the antler growth on the bucks was just fantastic as well. And I predicted that. And lo and behold, 50 miles from my house, they killed the world record in non-typical.
Wow.
The Luke Brewster buck is not killed not that far from me. Well, this year I'm going the opposite direction. And from what I've seen, and one man has only got limited resources, so it's far from a scientific conclusion. But my opinion, based on what I've seen, is that the buck antler growth this year is down from what it typically is.
Okay. So, but you still have some fresh cameras. It sounds like that you've not had your busy schedule has kept you from checking them. So it sounds like you might have an ace up your sleeve yet.
Well, I'm hoping. I mean, there was a 200-inch buck that I've been watching for a couple of years.
Wow.
I get his picture in the summer, but then he relocates about the time he sheds velvet. And I know where he goes, but I just can't get permission to hunt around where he goes. So this year he totally disappeared on me. I've got probably 6-8 cameras where I've always got his picture in the past. I don't have a single picture of him yet. And there's other bucks. There was a buck that I intended to probably target this year. Was going to be a big typical. Probably he was in the 170s easy last year, and I was hoping maybe he would hit 180 as a clean typical. He's smaller than he was last year.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of other bucks have fewer points than they did last year. I had a buck that called the fork tine buck. Hey, it's always had fork G2s. This year he don't have fork G2s. He's only got 4 points on one side where he's always had 5. And instead of having the forks on both G2s, he's just got a flyer off of one G2. No doubt it's the same deer.
Right.
But I don't think he'll score as good as he has in the past. And it's just been buck after buck like that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not I don't have a beat on those caliber of deer here in PA, but there's for me at least there's 2 deer that I actually got on camera this year that I'm pretty excited to hunt. One's a new piece of public property that I scouted and found a decent deer, which I'm pretty excited about. And then one, I found sheds from one last year that I'm pretty excited about. Then I've got him on camera now a couple of different times showing up. So, and I think, I found his sheds where I think where he's bedded or where he's using, where he's bedding down. So I'm hopeful to be able to put a plan together for one of those 2. But I think that does it for part number 2. And if you're a willing participant, I think we'll plunge ahead to our last segment, part number 3.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Don for joining, and of course, thank all of you for listening. Just as a quick heads up, Don has a new podcast that's about to come out if it hasn't already released by the time that I put this podcast out. So if it is out, be sure to go check that out. If it's not out, be on the lookout for his episodes that'll be forthcoming. You'll definitely want to give that a check. Of course, Don has a wealth of knowledge, and he'll be sharing that on his own platform going forward. You also want to check out his blog. There's a lot of great writing there. I've, of course, found inspiration and pulled nuggets from that as well. And then, of course, check out his Real World Wildlife Products website as well if you haven't already. Of course, if you haven't, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to the podcast to make sure you get all this great content delivered directly to your pocket in the form of an iPhone through iTunes and all the other places where you can find podcasts. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Gumleaf USA Boots, Obsession Bows, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time,